All right, Ripley and I are live. I don't know how long Ripley is going to stay, but she's with us for the moment for our that's as long. She might come back. But anyway, for our Sunday night mental health conversation where we have mental health unscripted. I don't even remember, did I even put the title of the right thing on what this is called? Mental health unscripted, where we don't script what we're going to say, as you can tell from the way I'm saying it. Ooh, I already got a like. Thank you for whoever did that. Oh, and yep. Obviously, for some of you can see that the chat started early with some random tomfoolery or Joe foolery. Anyway, so typical disclaimer when we start to this chat is there's no guarantee for confidentiality because this is online, right? So there's pros and cons with being where you do online stuff, and one of the cons is that there's no guarantee people won't use this against you in the court of law or public opinion. But I do my best to try to keep it somewhat anonymous, and that's why I don't call out necessarily people in the chat. So the live streaming thing is kind of like, oh, look, Jack and Jill are here or whatever. I don't really do that. But I do appreciate everyone who does chat, and feel free to call each other out in the chats. I think I have it set up. I try to have it set up. I'm not a YouTuber. I don't really know how to do these things where you can see the chat after the live stream. A lot of live streams don't do that, where it's like if it's chatted, and this is the same thing with like, hey, feel free to, like, if you like something, heart it in the comments or something like that, but it won't actually be a thumbs up for the video, which I got another thumbs up. Thank you. Where the thumbs up for the video will help the algorithm. Comments for the video will help the algorithm. Subscribing, sharing, things like that do help the algorithm and have more and more people discover mental health, at least the R&R style. So anyway, we would appreciate that. And we being Ripley and I got another like, so I appreciate that too. But pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to always put the precedent on comments that I get in the chat. So if you have questions or comments, that is my number one thing with the whole purpose of this video. Got another thumbs up. Man, I'm getting thumbs up all over the place. I'm loving it. So that's my priority in terms of tonight and what we're doing for the live stream. If you're on this later, feel free to come. It's 7:00 Eastern time at Sunday. Got another like. I love it. Thank you guys. 7:00 Eastern time is when we do this chat. So, oh, and then I lost a like. That's interesting. Someone unliked it. Oh, whoops. Guess I did something wrong. But anyway, if you come Sunday Eastern time, they liked it again. Okay, cool. We are having this informal chat about mental health every week. I try to do it. And but if you also put comments on later in the video, I will see those comments. I respond to all of my comments on YouTube. And I didn't get any feedback on whether or not you liked the ACT book, which we hadn't gotten fully through. So I'm still going to go through it when we're not getting questions, because I didn't get any negative feedback. But I would appreciate if you letting me know if you like this, because I could do other stuff like it where we're going through material or just chat about different topics when we're not getting chat. Because I don't want to obviously just to sit here and just go, why aren't you chatting questions? No questions, right? That's not entertaining. Right? And I want to keep it lively, especially for the people who watch later on, which we do have some. So this little fledgling channel is talking about ACT, which is my favorite form of therapy. I shared last week about acceptance and commitment therapy, which is an evidence-based therapy that I learned about while getting my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And it was one of the forms of therapy I didn't know existed. It is a newer form of therapy. It's a third wave therapy. The first wave was behavioral therapy, where we realized with operant conditioning, the same thing that you use in animal training works on people too, and helps understand that basically behaviors that are rewarded are more likely to continue. That's the basis, the basic premise of behavioral therapy. What we realize with cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the second wave of behavioral therapy, that the way you think matters just as much as the way you act. So basically, it's the same thing for the thought patterns and emotions that you reward will also be incentivized to be more likely to continue. Third wave of behavioral therapy added in some mindfulness and kind of honed the tool sets a little bit more. Now, there's a bunch of different ones like dialectical behavioral therapy and ACT, and I would count EMDR in that, although some people might not call it a third wave of behavioral therapy. But the point is it's using the mindfulness and the behavioral therapy stuff to all get to the pinnacle of mental health and success. So everything is wonderful, and you never have any problems again once you come to therapy with me or aggressively sip coffee. Well, let me see what the questions. I like when you have random tangents. Good, because I can't really control that. You've been trolled in the dislikable fashion that I often get trolled, and that is one of the reasons why you're here. Kidding. My best friend is a therapist, and I still don't know how to act. I guess you would say it's true that opposites attract. Well, it's like when they say that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I think that you were so attracting mental health issues that a therapist was just bound to eventually connect with you and be like, oh, okay. Maybe the therapist happened to be in training at the time and was like, oh, this is a great opportunity to work on pretty much every mental health disorder at the same time. I should add this disclaimer. That was a joke, one. And two, I know who I'm talking to and would not make those jokes with someone who would not appreciate them. So for those of you who don't know me, I don't normally joke with clients like that. And that is not a client, it's a friend. My bag, okay. Or aggressively sip. I get the aggressively sip coffee. Yes, that's right. Okay, so acceptance and commitment therapy. This is a flip book, and it goes through the basics, which you can watch last week's, where we went through the basic of the idea of being really at the core of it is pause for dramatic effect. Becoming psychologically flexible. And there's these 6 different degrees of ACT, these 6 different tool sets. It's called the ACT Helix, if you want to look it up later. Acceptance, self as context, connecting with the present moment, committed action, values, and diffusion. The stuff, some of it's self-explanatory, like connecting with the present, committed action, and values, although there's a lot of nuance there with ACT that's very helpful. The things that are a little bit harder to explain, even though you might say self-acceptance is self-explanatory, it's really not. There's a lot of depth there. But self as context and diffusion are definitely things that are not necessarily naturally understood. And diffusion, so this is one of the, diffusion is a frustrating word to spell, because it will tell you it's misspelling it even when you are spelling it right. Because fusion is a word, but diffusion, a lot of dictionaries do not have the word diffusion in there. It's a very ACT word. Obviously, you can diffuse a bomb, so diffuse is a word, but diffusion is an ACT term. So, I don't want to get... Somebody said they like my tangents, so hopefully everyone does, because a tangent is English was originally language was originally phonetic, which means the sounds and the way you spell it were the same. So there was no such thing as a misspelled word if the which is which didn't exist originally, because it's just what sounds the word out is proper. But we don't have to get into the nuances of grammar. Diffusion is making a statement that is separating your identity from what you're experiencing. It's just a thought. It's just a feeling. It still matters, so you're not detaching, but you are diffusing from that thing, which helps you to regulate and manage it better and get more perspective on it. And self as context is this term that allows you to see yourself in different contextual settings, and you don't put your identity on a content of your life, but you put it on a general flexible context. So in other words, I can be this way in these circumstances is a much safer and more accurate identity marker. Because when we have identity markers in any kind of certain thing, it becomes far less flexible. So in other words, even if it's a good thing, right? So you say I'm tough, right? If I take my identity as being someone who's tough, then I might actually work to the detriment of my health, my relationships, my goals in life, in the name of toughness, because I might be in a place where I am struggling, maybe even physically struggling. But since I so identify as a tough person, I don't want to admit how bad I'm struggling. So I don't seek help. And it works to my long term detriment. It moves me away from my goals, even though you could say being tough is a virtue, right? You could say it's one of your values, but you don't want to have it be an identity marker. So even positive identity markers don't necessarily work for the good. Now, even more so with negative identity markers, obviously, like I'm stupid does not help you learn better. Okay, would you say having 5 cats would help someone with every mental health disorder? I think that cats do cure a lot and help you regulate a lot. I don't know if it's more cats will help you regulate more. Um, I do have a theory that there's diminishing returns on that. But what I would say is it's not just being in the presence of a cat, it's being connected with that cat. And so if you can manage 5 cats and connect with all of them, that's great. That's impressive. For me, 2 was about as much as I can manage. So that's my perspective on that thing. But I did know someone that had 13 cats. And if you know who I'm talking about, I got to be careful because this is online. But I wouldn't necessarily say it created more mental stability for that person. Okay, so today we're talking about connecting with our values. And if you see, there's these different categories. And one of the things that's really helpful in looking at these things, and some of it you'd be like, well, I already know this. I'm an adult. Like, what is this thing for values for kids? Is that learning how to articulate and process and having actually something that you're going through and sometimes even working it out and writing it down makes a difference. And that's one of the things we found in diffusion is even the words we use will change. I got another like, thank you. Will change our perspective on that thing. Right. So language is powerful. And all of ACT actually is based on, I didn't say this last week, relational frame theory. And I didn't say it because you don't really need to know anything about relational frame theory before for you to be able to really use all of the ACT tools. But basically what it says, layman's term, is that the way we frame things, the perspective that we have towards it changes our relationship with those things, therefore changes the experience of those things. So having even just the understanding of the importance of these things and its importance from 1 to 10 will help you connect more with your values. So these are a very basic value framework. With my clients, I go through something a little more intensive often when we go through our values. I think we talked last week about like candor and politeness as 2 opposing values. So you have to kind of choose between. And I think that gives you a lot of depth of understanding of your values. Someone says that they're pretty sure it's illegal to have 5 cats, or maybe it's illegal to have every mental disorder, or maybe if you have every mental disorder, you don't care what's illegal. But either way, going through the values that you have to choose between can be a very helpful exercise. But this one goes through like family relations, marriage, intimate relations, parenting, friendship and social life, career, employment, education, personal growth, recreational fun, spirituality, citizenship, environment, community life, health, and physical well-being. And you kind of like use different life examples of how you can connect with your values on that thing and what is the importance from 1 to 10. All right. And then in the bottom is things you wanted to be when you were a kid and what you would want written in your obituary. Right. And so the obituary list might be something that sounds a little, they said the 13 cats is what is probably illegal, not the 5. That's probably technically true. But anyway, what would you want in your obituary list is actually the one of those two that I like the best, because even though it's kind of morbid, it's really thinking about the end of life purpose. Because the reality is your beginning life stuff helps you understand maybe some of your core design or your early influences. But the reality is we are, as human beings, supposed to evolve, grow, and change. So a lot of the things we wanted to be as kids, it's not like they're more pure and necessarily a better thing to strive for. I look at some of the things that I wanted to do when I was younger, and now I'm like so grateful. I mean, honestly, I'll use one example. It's like I was recently watching, I've always loved movies, and I've thought about wanting to be an actor and a director and all those other things when I was younger. And I was watching this very talented actor, and I was really enjoying his gifts. And I think I could have been a very talented actor if I had invested in that. But I was actually thinking to myself, man, I'm so glad at this stage in my life that I can enjoy his gifts and that I didn't pursue that life. Because even though you could say richer, the fame and the money would be so great, the lack of anonymity would be terrible for me. I would hate being stopped everywhere I go and having people always looking for what they could get out of me and not being able to ever separate from that. Have you any thoughts of Edgar Cayce? I don't know who Edgar Cayce is, so I'm going to have to either look that up later or get some context from you to be able to answer that. Cue Richard doing an impression soon. I don't think I was going to, but now I'm tempted to. But my impressions, the problem is even my Christopher Walken one, which is Rusty, is like less and less of a thing because he's not acting as much anymore. And then, like, so few people know Jimmy Stewart, which is the one. I know the old Jimmy Stewart a lot better than the young Jimmy Stewart, because actually, similar to Christopher Walken, he developed a more distinct way of talking as he got older, and I think it's wonderful. Actually, I would say in terms of off subject, this is a tangent, but individuation, right? As people develop and become a very unique individual and a reflection of who I believe they were designed to be, ideally anyway, I do think they move into the uniqueness in a beautiful way, that even the way they talk becomes more distinct from the norm, more distinct from others. And you do see that with some actors. Of course, that's more like than character actors that disappear in the role, like Daniel Day-Lewis. Guys like Christopher Walken, who really just play the same, they play themselves, but in different versions. And they get to a more distinctive uniqueness of who they are that I think is really beautiful. But we knew which one you were going to do. Yeah, I mean, like, I really only, in terms of when I was talking about I could have been a good actor, I didn't really mean impressions. I can only really do two well, and that's that and Christopher Walken. And Christopher Walken's been a while, but it's like Frankenstein never scanned me. Marsupials do, because they're fast. But he's got that cadence in his tone that's very unique to Christopher Walken. So anyway, way off tangent. This is a weird mental health video today, so sorry if you're a normal person and watching this. Okay, so finding values in our suffering. So clients often battle with their suffering, trying hard to push it away. However, when something distresses us, it often is because it's threatening something we truly value. So we look at these things as like our hidden values, right? When we get overwhelmed and we lose touch with their values, there's something that's we're going through and we're struggling. For example, if you worry about your family, that tells me that your family is important to you. If you try to push away your worries, you can end up actually pushing away your family. So that's a thing about experiential avoidance and not doing that. I saw a reel recently of other actors doing their imitation of Matthew McConaughey. It was excellent. Yeah, I've thought about adding Matthew to the because he's a fun one to spoof, especially with like mental health stuff. Because my bias towards Matthew McConaughey is his mental health wisdom is stuff that might sound smart from a distance, but really doesn't make any sense at all. But anyway, so one of the things we do in ACT is we take our struggles, right, our worries, and we try to reframe what's valuable about those things. So we think through of like retracing the things you're struggling with as a hidden value that helps you understand what matters most to you. And so this is how we can then prevent unhealthy experiential avoidance by looking at the things that you're most struggling with and saying, oh, wow, this is the stuff that I value. This is the stuff that I appreciate. So often people do this, like especially when it comes to romance. There are people, well, I'm not going to go into details here, but like there are people that I know that the thing that they want most in life is to have a husband or wife or family and kids or whatever, and they're pushing those things away. And you see this often, honestly, not to be stereotypical as somebody who lives with a cat, but often somebody who lives with a cat is like talking about how great it is to living with a cat, and talking about family is something that is settling down, but they're really trying to push away the thing that they want most in life because they're scared. So pushing away our suffering often also pushes away what we value most, if that makes sense. Instead, what we're trying to do in ACT is gently hold our suffering and our values together. So this is one of the problems with people who are trying not to experience anxiety in life, because anxiety is positively correlated with meaning and purpose. So in other words, it's not necessarily a direct relationship like causational. It doesn't mean that the more purpose you have, the more anxiety you have. But if you think about it, it makes sense. The more you care about something, the more it's going to cause anxiety. The solution is not to stop caring about things. That will lead to an empty life. So do what matters. Connect with your values is part of the ACT evidence-based approach. Is schizophrenia typically treated with meds, and can treatment be successful without it? Yes, schizophrenia is typically treated with meds, and yes, it can be treated successfully without it. So one way that we treat schizophrenia now, and this used to be different. So like when you watch Terminator, it's my go-to example of schizophrenia, I guess. Sarah Connors, I think is her name, was thought to be delusional and schizophrenic, having this, version of reality that clearly never happened. Of course, we know it really did happen, and Skynet is a real thing, although now it goes by the name Alexa. But the point is when she's in that, they're confronting her with her delusions and trying to get her to admit that the things that she is delusional about are not real. This form of therapy does not work. And so what we actually do with schizophrenic clients is we validate the emotions underneath their delusions, because there's a reason that their delusions came from something. Just like dissociative identity disorder, the farther that you go from reality, there's always an emotional root to that is grounded in truth, right? In an experience and a feeling. So no matter how crazy someone's response to something is, there's going to be something valid underneath. And so we kind of actually more like now trace their delusions. We don't validate their delusions, but we don't confront them either, usually. We trace them to try to see the value hidden underneath. And what's real about that? What was the core of their wound that caused them to retreat into this fantasy? And then when that is addressed in a way that makes them feel safe, their delusions go away more than not. Okay. Is there many, if any, mental health diagnoses that have a genetic deposition? So for that, now the model that is most used is the biopsychosocial method, which is biology, psychology, and social settings. These are the three things that all weave together. So it's not nature versus nurture. It's understanding the biological influence. And yes, there is one with pretty much every uh, mental health disorder. Even mood disorders have biological roots, psychological and sociological, right? So, like, what's your family of origin and how did that influence you? What's your psychological perspective on these things? And what is your biology and your predisposition based on your biology? Someone said that it's not Alexa, that is Skylink or whatever it's called. It's Starlink, which is the Elon Musk company that does the satellite things. I think that you're going to find those billionaires are all interconnected and they're all part of Skylink. Who knows, or whatever it's called, whatever that thing with Terminator is. Skylink, Starlink, it's all the same. What does it typically come from? Now I sound schizophrenic. Wait, so does it typically come from like a specific or event or a long time period of something? Schizophrenia? Yes, is your answer. So there's a biological predisposition when it comes to retreating into fantasy and mental health disorders. There's a psychological thing that happened where there's some kind of psychological break from reality, and there's social factors that influence the person to retreat into fantasy. I think this is true even of like antisocial personality disorder, which is what people call sociopathy or psychopathy. There's going to be long-term period events, but also a specific traumatic event can cause an episode that basically there's a psychological break and they retreat into one of those mental health disorders, if that makes sense. Keep asking questions. I love the questions. If you don't know what I'm talking about, especially. Can a lone wolf ever be able to join the pack? Absolutely. So, when we're dealing with lone wolf syndrome kind of thing, we're going to trace like what's going on with that thing. And with everything, normally, now there are people that are really hard. It's really hard for them to connect because they're just awkward enough that it's hard for them to find a tribe. But most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, the fear of rejection is perceived based on past experiences, but not actually as a realistic threat as they are projecting. So we are, as human beings, very likely to imagine worst case scenarios. Our brain is trying to keep us safe and can often work against us being happy. So what we have to do consistently to be going from the lone wolf to joining the pack is reevaluating our signals because they're going to be off. So in other words, the hardest part of going from lone wolf, especially if you identified as lone wolf, because that going back to that identity markers, the self as content with act language, it's hard to change identity markers, and you're going to feel like you're putting yourself at risk. Or to say it another way, the version of you that is the lone wolf feels like it's dying while you're starting to connect with a pack. So it's a very emotionally difficult thing to do. But with that said, it's a thing that is inevitable that you can heal from and change if you continue to put yourself in safe packs. If you put yourself in dangerous packs, you're going to find an excuse to retreat, which some people actually are likely to do because the brain is also trying to become right. So sometimes people are attracted to cultures that are clearly unhealthy at one after another, and then they're like, "Oh, I knew it. People are just not trustworthy." Right? And this happens with a relationship. It's like every man is terrible after they continue to choose to date the person that is toxic one after another, and said that the person that is safe and consistent and healthy is boring and uninteresting. And so then they walk away going, you know, whatever. Men, if they're, attracted to men, or women, if they're attracted to women, are clearly all terrible. And it's like, well, you just chose to date the terrible ones. What do you expect? That makes sense. Do you think there are ever people that are too old to learn new tricks, or like too set in certain ways, or is it just unwillingness? So ACT, being the third wave, is rooted in behavioral therapy, and behavioral therapy shows that the more you reinforce a behavior, the stronger it becomes. Now, that can be an asset eventually, but in the case that you're talking about is a struggle. So basically, yes, people can learn new tricks. No, they're never too old. The brain is not as diminishing as people make it out. I think that's overestimated. Of like, for instance, I'll have people, who are older say, "Oh, I'm losing my memory. I can't remember anything." And it's like, one, I think they forgot how much they forgot things when they were younger. But also, when you're younger, so say you're 40 years old, you don't have to remember things that happened 60 years ago because you weren't alive. And when you're 20 years old, it's like you only have 20 years of memories to try to process through. So, like, if you're thinking about all of your memories as file cabinets, if you had one file cabinet and someone's like, "Hey, could you find me this file?" Yeah, sure. Give me 1 minute. And you can find that, whatever the file is, even if you've got a disorganized file cabinet. If you've got, you know, 2, 3, 4 rooms full of different file cabinets, and someone asks for a file, you're going to be like, "Oh, I know I put it somewhere." You better hope you have a really organized system to find those files, or you're going to be like, "I have no clue." You're going to have to give me like a week to think about it to find that file cabinet. So, like, as you get older, you've got way more emotions, way more experiences, way more thoughts, way more feelings to process. So you do have to go slower in all of that. So I wouldn't say it's just unwillingness, but I will say it's these very conditioned responses that you have to then reprocess. So please be gracious to you, but it's not that you actually have less mental abilities than someone in their 20s or 30s. But yes, someone in their 20s is going to be more likely in general to be psychologically flexible than somebody who's 70 years old, simply because there's way less to process, if that all makes sense. Cool. Okay, so now contacting with the present moment. By the way, I love these questions. Please keep them coming. I mean, I prefer that to this booklet stuff too. And hopefully other people do too. Contacting with the present moment. The simplest grounding exercise that you can do is just talking about these different senses. So this is like, a lot of people know this one, but if you're struggling and you're really feeling attacked, attached, dysregulated, however you want to say it, thinking about what you see, what you hear, what you can feel with your body sensations, what you smell, and what you can taste. And often what they do is they go through a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 list of 5 things you can see, 4 you can hear, 3 you can feel, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but the whole idea is just to put yourself back in the present moment, because we as human beings can be way too focused on what internally is going on and break from reality. And when we're grounded in the present moment, it's a lot easier for us to deal with our thoughts and our feelings, if that all makes sense. Okay, being more present in your daily life. So this goes right to what I was saying about the idea of being lost in thought. So in ACT, we talk about thoughts and feelings that hook us and kind of drag us in to our own kind of psychological world, and that can be very detrimental to our mental health. Question actually, I think that is related to what we're talking about, just came up in the chat. Should meditation be taught in school? So arguably, it kind of is, but it should absolutely far more so. But I'm going to talk about what meditation is, uh, both in the clinical sense. Well, let's just focus on the clinical sense. So the clinical sense of what meditation is to deeply focus on something. That's it, right? So if you say, oh, we're going to start, I mean, I can see like a bunch of Christian conservatives being really upset because they're like, they're teaching meditation in school. This is Eastern philosophy or Eastern religion, and they're trying to make my kids, Buddhist or something, right? I'm not saying breath work would even be the worst thing to teach in school. It's really helpful and it's evidence-based. It's part of therapy for a reason. But meditation is not simply going in a room. Meditation is learning how to focus your spotlight to know how to deeply think about things. And kids nowadays need that more than ever because we are so distracted by devices that going on all the time. So a huge part of mental health and a huge part of what I call mental health kung fu is learning how to focus, regulate, and be mindful. And that is meditation. That's what meditation is. Now, under that broad umbrella, there's a lot of different meditation techniques. And one of them we're talking about right now with even the 5 grounding things we just went over is absolutely meditation, right? So you're not closing your eyes, you're looking at 5 things, right? But it is actually that deep focus of meditation. So at any moment, and this is another thing that I do this exercise with people where people are like, oh, I wish I had time to take a vacation, or I wish I had the money to take a vacation, but I don't. It's like we have such a powerful mind that at any time in our day, we could take 2 minutes and go anywhere in the world or even somewhere in space, somewhere that doesn't even exist, and mindfully escape into that moment in such a powerful way that it actually changes the way that we feel, and down to chemically, like neurologically, it is real to us. It is as real to us as if with practice. I'm not saying that we all have the skill immediately, but most people, there are a few exceptions, but most people could develop this skill with practice, where they can live entirely in a different mindset based on a place of peace, a relaxing visualization, meditation works great. Okay. So when you get lost in your head, your imagination only works one direction. If instead you think about where you'd like to be more present and refocus that, that's the same skill, right? So whether we're escaping to dread about the future. So one of the things that's interesting is I'll work with a client that's like, I can't do these visualization meditations. And I'll try to tell them, yes, you can. I know you can because you have a lot of depression, or I know you can because you have a lot of anxiety. Because what depression and anxiety are when they're at an extreme form is a very active imagination that is just not being controlled. So you are visualizing things. You're just visualizing the loss when you're depressed, or the perceived reality and how it breaks from your ideal reality. Anxiety, you're imagining dread. You're imagining a negative scenario that could be happening. Well, teaching people to think is scary. So, yeah, and I get that, but I will say, teaching people how to think is a far better practice for our schools to be doing than teaching people what to think. I wish we did a lot more teaching people how to think than trying to teach people what to think. So filling people up with data, especially in today's world where like data, whether it's accurate or not, and maybe with AI, it's going to be like less and less accurate. AI is not very accurate, by the way, just so don't use AI as your end all be all for fact checking because it's shockingly inaccurate. But data is at our fingertips at all times, right? We don't really need to memorize data anymore. We do need to learn how to process and how to think. How do you handle an addiction that is part of a life that's impossible to completely avoid? Phone, food. Oh, good example. Okay. So, actually, honestly, mindfulness is a huge part of that. So, like taking breaks. And one of the things you got to do is you got to lower the bar and just celebrate and reward, going back to behavioral therapy as our foundational principle. You have to start rewarding little steps in the right direction. So if you find that your phone is becoming a problem and you're going to phone over and over, try not to focus on how to make it harder for you to do your phone or beating yourself up for being too on your phone. People do that, and that can be part of the solution, but it shouldn't be the primary. The primary focus to try to avoid being too addicted to your phone or food is doing some positive things that are more healthy for you and celebrating that and rewarding that like crazy, right? So what do I mean? Like if you're starting to go to food for comfort, ask yourself, what are you really trying to avoid? What is the experience you're trying to avoid? Is it sadness? Is it grieving? Then what would be some healthy way to process and grieve? Go do that first and then let yourself have the food, right? Almost as a reward. And now you are going to be less and less stuck in that addiction, if that makes sense. Meditation is the medication that alleviates the prediction of hesitation. I think overly wordy than it had to be, but it absolutely is true. Meditation is something that helps alleviate the trouble of our struggle in our mind, right? Whether it's hesitation or entanglement, right? Whether it's because we're overly fused to it or we're stopping ourselves from engaging in life. Meditation can help us as we process through that to be better at doing it. In some ways, you are all meditating far more than you think you are. You're just not doing it intentionally, so it's going to a very dark place. If you struggle with any kind of anxiety, you're a meditator. If you struggle with any kind of depression, you're a meditator. You're just not meditating in a positive direction. What is it? Oh, I agree on how I agree on how to think. I was being sarcastic. Yeah, no problem. I figured. I heard the opposite of addiction is connection. This is an interesting. I like that theory. So, wouldn't it be helpful to meditate on connecting with God to battle the woes of early recovery? Absolutely, absolutely, of any kind. Yeah. So for sure. So connecting with anything bigger than yourself is a huge way to overcome the limitations that you are personally struggling with. It makes sense if you think about it, right? You're tapping into something bigger than you rather than trying to fix you. But okay, so where does the opposite of addiction is connection come from? Because this seems really random, and it's not, but it all came from the rat park thing. So they studied addiction primarily with rats because behavioral therapy, again, see, these are all things connected in the mental health world, was studied because rats had similar patterns when it comes to addiction as humans. So, and they were easy to study. and not as you don't get as many people mad at you than if you get a bunch of rats addicted to cocaine than if you get a bunch of humans addicted to cocaine just to study it. People have a little bit of a problem with that for obvious reasons. One scientist at a certain point realized, wait a second, every addiction study, we're studying a rat in a cage, that they've got nothing to do all day. If I was in a cage all day, yeah, I might do the cocaine. Like, I'm so freaking bored. I'm alone. All right. I've got nothing to entertain me and engage in life. So they developed this rat park where it was like all super fun and engaging, and there's other rats. And sure enough, they chose the water over the cocaine. And so then this came with this theory that learning how to connect, despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage. That if we have a good way to connect, we are less likely to want to addict. And then after that study, we started to guess on why that was. And we started to see these connections of like, oh yeah, of course, going back to the ACT principle, third wave now of behavioral therapy. That's why it's open, aware, and engaged. The engaged part is the connection. So engaged in the present moment, engaged in God, or they say a higher power, like the God of my understanding, right? Engaged in a purpose, could be even nature, or engaged in a relationship can help connect us beyond our experiences and our emotions. And one thing we talked about in the church that I attend, we do a thing called CEU, which is continued education or continue Christ encouraging understanding, depending on how you look at it. But anyway, in that, there was a thing where we talked about just being present and how sometimes someone having no answers, but just being with someone can help them process their emotions. And sure enough, that's been studied and that is evidence-based. So just being around someone, just being able to connect in grief, and that's a hard thing to do as a friend. You think you have to come up with answers or solutions, but really just being present with them can be enough, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Let me know. So that comes to the movies in our minds, which I like this part. This is one of my favorite parts of this thing because I don't know about you, but I grew up on movies and I love movies. And some movies have really helped me engage in life differently. I think about life differently because of these stories that we get to see in the cinema. And sometimes I would use my imagination to play out different movies, which is actually a meditation exercise. I used to do that to like go to sleep at night. Like I'd start essentially actively dreaming until I allowed myself to fall into my dreams when I was like overthinking and worrying. Even though I didn't know what I was doing at the time, I was literally doing an ACT exercise. So sometimes we can get lost in a movie, right? We're lost in this idea. Have you ever been there where you're watching a movie and like it's not like you think that you're in the movie, but you're like not even aware of your circumstances anymore or your surroundings because you're so engaged in the story, right? That's the mindfulness exercise. The characters, they can make us laugh or cry, right? So likewise, we can forget the thoughts in our heads are like movies, right? I'm not saying they're not. In ACT, we don't try to specify whether it's true or not, but whether it's helpful or hurtful. When I'm really upset, there's nothing better than someone just sitting in the same room doing their own thing. Yeah, for sure. And that's actually one of the things, honestly, I love about cats is I love having a cat that just stays in the same room as me. They don't necessarily need me to always be engaging with them and playing with them. We just like sharing the same space. And Ripley, most of the time, is in the same room as me, right? And I can look over at her and she looks over at me and she just starts purring and then I just go back to what I'm doing. That presence alone is super healing. When we step back and remember that our thoughts are these movies in our minds, we can recognize, and this is a diffusion exercise, life is still going on around us, right? So the movie can keep playing. It's not like we're trying to stop the movie, but we don't have to get lost in it. So sometimes you can play a sad movie and there's like, I don't always want to watch a sad movie, but there's times that I'm like, I'm ready. I'm ready to process a sad movie. I'm ready to go through it. It took me so long to watch Schindler's List, but man, I didn't regret when I watched it. Of course, that actually, well, I don't want to give away the ending, but I'll just say I thought the ending was going to be a lot darker than it was. All that to say, joy, sorrow, happiness are all not terrible experiences, right? All of the emotions. I've not actually watched The Life of Pi yet. It's on my list. I keep putting it off for some reason, but I do want to watch it. But anyway, yeah, maybe I could do a therapist reacts to that movie and watch it with that in mind. But anyway, when we're experiencing these thoughts and feelings, the reason they become too wonderful or terrible for us is because we get lost in the movies, because we forget that it's just a movie. We forget that it's just an experience. We forget that it isn't everything, right? And so the mindfulness exercise allows us to experience the movie while we're still aware that it's a movie. Movies would no longer become entertaining if we completely lost that. Like I said, that we lose it in a moment where we're so engaged that we're not aware of our circumstances. We still know it's a fantasy. There are many movies that would be the most terrible things existing. No one would watch them for entertainment if they thought they were real, right? These horror movies that it's like, no, I don't want to think, oh, no, right? But it's this fantasy, it's this separation, this diffusion, right? So if I went through my own thoughts and feelings like a movie and go, okay, I'm just playing a sad movie today, right? It makes it way easier to endure the circumstances. So if you looked at your depression or grief as if it was like a movie that you are going to watch and then process and then think about and then live a life of more meaning, more engaged because you watched that movie and you allowed yourself to process and think about it, you'd probably have a lot easier time going through those emotions, right? So that's one of the act metaphors of life at the movies. Does that make sense? Right? So the more you recognize these feelings, these thoughts are like these movies, the less power they have over you. You get familiar with how they play out and get less caught up in them. That's the other thing is like when you've watched a movie a bunch of times, it ends the same way every single time. It's not like one time, oh, the bad guy got away in the end this time, didn't last time, but now he got away, right? Or if it's a sad ending, like it's just same sad ending every single time. When we play out these same thoughts and these same feelings, they're going to end the same way, right? And I'm not saying it's not, again, the point of this perspective is not to stop playing the movies, right? But it is to no longer become so fused to them that we start to get lost, right? We recognize that they are just feelings, they're just thoughts, they're just experiences that we are not stuck in forever. They're going to play out and they're going to play out the same way, but they are not who we are and they are not our entire life story. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? So, what thought or feeling are you struggling with, right? Process through it. If you think about, like, if it had a size, how big would it be? If it had a shape, what shape would that be? So our brain actually, for a lot of people, and people do think a little bit differently in terms of their processing, but most people are predominantly symbolic in the way that they think about things. And this is why dreams are the way that they are, right? Because what dreams are is they're metaphoric representations of what we're processing. And it plays with data in ways that, like, sometimes people think are weird, but always make sense to me because it's with the theme, right? So for instance, you might have your father yell at you in a dream, but what you're actually processing is anxiety about what might happen at your workplace. And it's your boss that you're really afraid is going to harm you, but your brain metaphorically put boss, father, male patriarchal authority figure kind of symbolically together, right? So when we're processing through our thoughts and our feelings, thinking of the shape, thinking of the color, right? Is it going fast? What is it? What would it smell like? How big? How heavy is it? All of these things can help us to actually process it better. So it might seem a little weird to go through that, but it actually can really help us to process. Do you think there's a correlation to mental health kung fu level and hair length? Why would you say that? What makes you wonder if I think that there's a correlation? So when I was a kid, I grew up reading the story of Samson, and he got stronger through his hair. So I figured that it was worth a shot. And so I haven't cut my hair in a year and a half, maybe more. At this point, I didn't expect it to go this long, but that's often what happens with me. Like, for a friend, I stopped drinking alcohol for 90 days, and that was like, I want to say like 5 years ago. So often when I just start, October of 2024 was, yeah, when last time I cut my, well, it was before that. I don't actually know the last time I cut my hair, but I have not cut it since October of 2024. But yeah, I do think there is a correlation, to answer your question, between mental health kung fu for me and my hair length. Because I tried to grow out my hair many, many years ago, and I grew out pretty long, but not this long. I cared too much about what people thought, what I looked like, and other things like that. And now, because of these mindfulness skills, because I'm at peace with myself, I care a lot less. So yeah, I'm not saying I will cut my hair at one point. I don't know when, but the day will come. But I could not cut my hair for the rest of my life. And I could not have done that before I had mental health kung fu, because I would have got stuck in a thought and then been like, forget this. I need to cut my hair. And while hair really doesn't matter, whether you have, as my dad said, a perfect head or you have hair, it's really just shallow and surface level. But there are many things in life that you want to be able to engage with consistency, even though feelings fade. So there are times that I look at my hair and I go, oh man, I really like the way this looks, or this is really cool, or it's fun to have this long hair. And there are other times that I look, man, you look stupid. I had to be blunt about it. I go, man, you look stupid. What are you doing? Why are you growing your hair? What is this? Right? But it's just a thought. It's just a feeling. Right? And so it comes, it goes. I watch it come, I watch it go. And then I move forward in what actually matters to me in my life, which is not my hair. It's not my looks, right? I'm not saying I have mastery over that in every issue, but right now I do have that over with my hair. Within sentience, the mind's predictions determine whether or our experience is felt as a separate or as separation or connection. All right, let me read that again. Within sentience, the ability to think, the mind's prediction, which, by the way, that's actually how we experience reality. Oh, I got another like. Thank you. We experience reality not based on reality, but by our prediction of reality, and then how close to that reality ended up being. And if it's close enough for us, we don't actually distinguish the difference. There's so much there. We could talk for a whole hour probably about what I just said. So our mind's predictions determine whether our experience is felt as separation or connection. That's absolutely true. That's 100% true. Okay. So your mind, going back to the lone wolf question, if your mind's prediction is that you're going to end up being alone for the rest of your life and you're always going to be a lone wolf, you're going to experience things that other people would experience as connection as separation, because your mind is based on the prediction of you being the lone wolf. That's one of the reasons why we should be very careful about identifying ourselves as a thing like a lone wolf, right? And seeing our identity as that, because then we are constantly predicting a reality that will equal separation rather than connection. With that said, we are at time. So this was one of my favorite chats. I love this. Thank you so much for all the people that were super active in the chats and any comments. Thank you for the people that liked. We got 8 likes while streaming, and I do appreciate every one of those in our fledgling little channel. Please tune in next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. Love you all. Your mental forecast spelled out your mental health. Yeah, no, exactly. The way you forecast can really, it makes a huge difference, huge influence on how you experience reality based on your prediction of it. All right, that's it. See you guys next week. Love you. Thank you again.